conversations around the reasoning behind it. I think if they have the clarity of why the decision's been made, I think that helps them. And then it's the question of, okay, well, coach, like, what can I do next time to not come off the pitch? I don't want to be coming off the pitch. How do I get better? And then that's where the kind of productive conversation comes in, and you can work and think forward rather than the overthinking and thinking backwards. So yeah, I think probably for me it would be those stages, like letting them just bring it back down, let them get it out if they need to, just for a little bit, and then having that having that near one-to-one conversation with them away from the group, just to speak it through, and then next step.
Good morning and welcome to the Reflective Coach podcast with Coach Luca. In this episode, I'm delighted to welcome sport and exercise science psychology student Connie Dayman. She's currently studying her Masters and she has done so well in her studies so far, and she talks about psychology and coaching in terms of her pathway, where she's going to go, and then we touch upon all the psychology around coaching, which was so interesting to touch upon and taking away considerations. If you're a coach or someone professional working with players, working with individuals, working with youngsters, there is so much to take away and think about in terms of just this quick fire episode that we created. I look forward to having Connie on again in the future, whereby we can expand and touch upon all these elements in a lot more detail and a lot more further in terms of that psychology. But we talk about types of feedback, terminal, concurrent, whether we give it at the start, whether we give it at the end, how we're giving it, when we're giving it, how much we're giving, the importance of it, how we continue on those building blocks, how we can utilise it, how we can work with players. We talked about terminology and how we can praise players, overpraise them, underpraise them, that balance, the importance of it, the considerations of the personality testing, whether it's important, whether it's detrimental, again, when we're using it, how we're using it, why we're using it, posing the key questions to players so they can understand why we've done it, why are we doing it, how we've done it, and the types of questions that we're asking, so question techniques, using it in a session, away from a session, one-to-one, groups, and it's so important to stop players from overthinking as well as utilising it to allow them to think a little bit more. It's great because we can use psychology in terms of how we can use questions, how we can use different elements with younger players to create fun little aspects, fun little games, especially to pack up sessions, to try and create those little competition-based elements within practice, and then how we use it with our older players so they can understand when they're coming off on the pitch, why they're doing it, why we're making a tactical change, how this has been beneficial to the team, and that importance of understanding the big picture of the team as well. When working with older players, sometimes we might have to go back and unpick the elements that they've been lacking, where this hasn't been coaching on, where they haven't had that support, where they've struggled to comprehend certain things. So it's that importance of going in and working with older players, how that may look, how we approach it, how we support them, where they might be reluctant, their different types of perspectives, their understanding, what they may have, what they may lack, the professionality in terms of it, how does this work in terms of grouping players internally in the wider group, where would they sit themselves, how does it sit in their personality, whether their personality changes, how it grows, the importance of mentoring, utilising the assistant coach, setting up practice, being professional, being organised, the different types of personality and backgrounds and environments of players, so where they're coming from, how they're going into a group, whether they look at practice and go straight in, whether they're a bit reluctant, especially important when we're recruiting younger players and we're setting up new teams, especially from a grassroots perspective. But being organised in our sessions, allowing players to really understand what our standards and expectations are, allowing them to come in and be organised, understand how the session is going to work, what's expected of them, how they're going to perform and be within that session. And then we talked about those different groups and how we may change in terms of our own personalities when we're coaching various groups. So if we're coaching under 9s and then coaching seniors, the way that we approach the session might be entirely different. And there's nothing wrong in terms of that. Our philosophy might stay the same. It just means how we communicate, how we approach, how we set up, how we talk, how we communicate our messages, give the feedback, how much ball rolling contact we're having, when we need to stop it, how we're doing it. Again, those personalities. So for an older player who has been in the game at seniors level, do they want as many questions? Do they have that knowledge and understanding? Are they going to be receptive to the information that's being given if we're creating a learning context compared to creating that learning context for younger players? Talking about equipping players to give them all those knowledge gains, whereby if we were to leave, if they were to go on and have a scholarship, if they would move to a different team, if an academy signed them, that they would be 100% ready to go on and have that equipped knowledge whereby they're ready, they're prepared, they can answer questions, they're approaching the game. Setting up players on that long-term journey, so when they are 16, 17, 18, 19 and they're deciding to go off to find that scholarship abroad, or if they want to just play football recreationally, whether they want to go down a coaching route, whether they just want to stay in the game because their friends have multiple reasons. There's so many different reasons at that age, or whether they get a job and the football isn't as big for them. It's about equipping them with that knowledge so they can stay in the game, so they can do coaching, do analysis, do psychology, do physiotherapy, do commentary and media, just anything around the game that keeps them in, because there's so much which we've equipped them with, or they might be equipped with, and they've been around the football world for so long, it'd be such a shame to lose them altogether. So then it's how do we sustain that participation, that viability, and keeping players interested and keeping them involved, and how we can support them. But there is so many considerations when it comes to psychology, and with me and Connie, we just literally scratched the surface today before even opening up a wide world. This was more of a learning exercise than anything, because there's so much in there, and when I'm in this episode, I'm constantly having so many questions, and then in the back of my mind I'm thinking, for those listening, I hope they have as many questions as I've had as well, and I hope you do, and I hope you enjoy this as much as possible. I hope you take considerations away for the way you think about your players, the way that you approach sessions, the way that you're organising things, the philosophy that you have, your own personality, whether you utilise your assistant coach groupings, how you can get through the players, your environment. There is so much within this episode, and I can't wait to do this again with Connie, and I can't wait to keep touching upon the psychology side of things, where there is going to be so much out there because of this. I would put myself as a psychology coach if I was to group myself in the types of coaches, and when it comes to thinking about individuals and people, they're at the forefront of my mind always. But this is absolutely a great episode. I hope you enjoy it and take as much away as I have. There is so much within this. You can listen to the Reflective Coach podcast on Twitter, YouTube, Spotify and Anchor. It's also on Podcast Addict. You can find it on Twitter and YouTube. It is the Reflective Coach podcast everywhere. On Twitter it is at TRC podcast _. I'm Anthony_Luca96, so this is Coach Luca. You can also find us on LinkedIn as well. This is such a great podcast and episode. I hope you enjoy it as much as I have. There is much within this. Go away, apply your learning, enjoy. This is Coach Luca, the Reflective Coach podcast. Drop a like, drop a follow, drop a subscribe, leave a comment. I hope to hear from you soon.
Sorry about that. Honestly, I have no idea what happened. It just completely dropped off.
That's right, that's no problems. We got there in the end.
Yeah, just about. Thank you for waiting.
That's right, no problems anytime. Thanks for coming on.
No problem, no worries.
How's your week been?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you. Yeah, I've been busy with uni work and stuff like that, but I'm getting there slowly, so yeah.
What year are you in?
My master's, so I'm just finishing in. I finished all my kind of like lectures and stuff in May, and then I've got like my final presentation in September, end of September.
Touching distance then, really?
Yeah, exactly. I feel like I've been in education for so long now, so it'd be nice to finally, get into things. So yeah.
Absolutely, and apply it and see where you go with it, and then see what happens there. Definitely interesting.
Yeah, it'd be good.
I had a friend who done something similar. So he done his undergrad in sports exercise science, then he done a master's in psychology, and then he was doing a PhD in something else. And I think he got halfway through the PhD and decided to drop out because he was like, I can't sustain this for however long he had left for it. Yeah,
I think you need to have some kind of break somewhere between it. I don't know, maybe I'll think about doing a PhD at some point, but I need a bit of time to reset first. But yeah.
I think he continued with it and then realised it was just too much, and it's difficult now because he's in a position where he'd have to be nominated and however it works to get back on, and all the work that he's done will no longer apply. So he'd have to literally restart from the beginning. So, but he's had a year out now. He's coming up to the end of the school year this year. Now he's going to do his PGC and then go down the teaching route with it. So,
cool. That's good.
Yeah, it's good. So, how does things look for you? Do you want to be a full-time sports coach, or is it a full-time psychologist, or is it something down those lines? What is it for you where you're going?
Yeah, so long term, like sports psychology. So I'm looking to do my CPAR route, which is the like basis accreditation, to be a sports psychologist. So I'm looking to do that in January, February time. So between like then and the next 2 years, it's kind of like you have a supervisor, you've got a trainee, you're the trainee, and then you kind of go out and do workshops and one-to-ones and that kind of thing. You kind of learn on the job, and then you have a support of a supervisor. And then once you've got that, you've got your accreditation, you can go out and practice. So yeah,
definitely
that's the
sounds
plan.
Interesting.
Yeah, but I'm still doing coaching alongside it. So I'm coaching at the moment. I'll probably coach whilst I'm doing the CPAR as well, just until I find the work. But yeah, that's the plan.
Because you can have a lot of psychologists and those who work in that side of the game mentally who haven't actually been in the sports coaching element. They also understand people, how they work and how they get through, and then how to correspond with the coaches that work on a pitch. But when you're on the pitch and you can sort of double up between then coaching with psychology and then psychology with coaching, and that's a good sort of route to go down and have that experience from that coaching aspect.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's where I went for a BASIS undergrad. So basically, you've got, I don't know how much you know about it, but I've got BASIS and BPS. So BASIS is more the sport and exercise science route, and then BPS is more just straight psychology. So you've got two like accreditation boards basically, and you can go either one now. They've created routes for both. It used to just be BPS, but now they've got BASIS one as well. So their undergrad's more like how much of sport can you know, basically. It's like coaching, it's the physio stuff, it's like biomechanics, performance analysis, covers kind of that. And that was like what my undergrad was. So it was a bit of a thing. So I think that's nice where you're going into an environment where you're working with all these different people and you kind of know, obviously you're not an expert in it, but you know a little bit about it. So when they're talking about things, you can pick up on it and you can make links to psychology as well. So yeah, I think that's nice where I've come from that background. It's definitely helped me so far. So,
and I firmly believe in psychology. I know that me and my friend were talking again, and we're saying like, you have specialist coaches which work on set pieces, those who work on throw-ins, and he said the way that the game's going to go, he would see psychologist coaches on the pitch. So they're literally doing the psychology whilst they're coaching, and that's what their focus is going to be. And it's an interesting concept in terms of where it's going to go, and it's that important because I'm massive on like mind and mental aspects of players when I'm on a pitch. I'm always thinking about how things work for them and how are they understanding it, what they're taking on board, perspectives, communication. There's a lot that comes into it in that. So I tend to focus more on the people side and all of that rather than the tactical elements. And I'm happy to leave the technical elements to someone else and for them to develop because I'm so interested in terms of getting through to the players.
Yeah, I think it's really important to kind of grow that relationship, isn't it? I think that's where the buy-in's going to come. So it's all well and good, as you say, like being all tactical, but like if you've not got the buy-in of the players, if you haven't built that relationship up, then it's not going to get through to them. So yeah,
absolutely.
I agree.
And in terms of that, obviously, I don't know whether you know Steve Salis. He's obviously teacher, mentor, psychologist himself, and he put a post out on LinkedIn talking about how we should work with players mentally, questions that we can ask them, and how to sort of develop their understanding and evolve it. But there are a few comments on there from coaches, mainly at grassroots level, who are saying the best kind of learning is just let the players get on with it and deduct away from asking these questions. And that was an interesting point because psychology has grown massively over the years, and certainly questions and mental side of things, and we're doing it more than ever, and it could be argued that it was never previously done as much before, and there were still performances, and are we doing too much of it? But it was interesting where he said just let the players get on and ask less questions, and I was reflecting a lot on that comment, and I was like, right, does that mean that we have someone who's quite clearly not understanding the player enough and hasn't adapted to the modern age of the player and the way we're going?
I think it's interesting. I'm studying a module at the moment, my master's, and it's around skill acquisition. And we were like looking at feedback and how feedback can be used to best help the player learn the skill rather than just simply like master the skill in the moment. And they were saying like it's better to use feedback 33% of the time than 100% of the time, because players will actually learn the process rather than just being instructed on exactly what to do at every moment. And over time, that will be more beneficial if you're working them at less feedback rate. So I think that's interesting in terms of what you just said. And then there's also like a constraints-led approach. So in terms of just letting the players kind of go off and do like a realistic environment training session, and then kind of bringing in constraints around kind of how they can afford different skills and how they can learn new things from that. So I think I think there's definitely a little bit of a kind of, not necessarily a switch up, but like a recognition that something needs to be changed a little bit in terms of coaching styles. I think, I mean, even coming from me, I've been coaching for 8 years, and I know that I can get a little bit stuck in my ways sometimes. Like, I know this drill, this is what I'm going to do, this is what I'm going to teach. And sometimes you just need to think about, like, okay, well, is that actually going to help in the long run? Like, yeah, in the moment, you'll have a kid hitting a tennis ball and it will go over there in the box and you'll be like, oh, perfect, there you go, job done. But is that actually going to help them next week when they come back? Are they going to be able to do the same thing? Or, is it back to square one? So I think it's definitely an important consideration on how we can kind of evolve our practice over time to make it more towards the learning side than just the outcome side straight away.
Absolutely, I completely agree with you. And there's so many key points there which I've drafted off on those thought processes. And certainly there's so much there. So when you say about feedback, and something that I certainly learned on my B license was the different types of feedback that we can give, whether it's terminal, so at the end where we stop it, get the group back in, and then we give that feedback to them and how it looks, or whether it's concurrent during their practice, and we allow practice to flow for that ball contact and rolling time to certainly increase. And it's interesting because some coaches will do a session and send the players away and straight off, and that's the end of the session. But I've always done it where player comes in, talk to them, and then we get into the session. I'll give a lot of concurrent feedback. At the end, then when we get a drinks break because they need it and we've done blocks, then I'll go in to write some terminal, and then at the end I'll do the terminal again, whereby they have something to leave on and we've had that key message. And I think it's that importance of having those conversations throughout, but not having too many, because it's those building blocks which are important. And if we can keep blocking the information and then keep reaffirming it, essentially that's what it's all about. And it's how we do it and not spending too much, because if we were to talk to players for 15 minutes, how much of that information are they going to retain or take away? And I remember going to a coaching session once, and the coach delivered a warm-up, very good, and it was a freezing night. It was probably about on minus degrees. It was freezing. I remember standing there. So he'd done this great warm-up, and then he talked to the players for 15 minutes. I was like, right, so your warm-up there was absolutely pointless because now they're freezing cold. They're freezing cold and probably not wanting to take much on and want to get into it. This is the wrong time and place how you're approaching this feedback in terms of the game last week. So it's definitely that importance. And I think, we can overstimulate with information, because I'm thinking of a coach that I coached against last week, and for 90 minutes he was just on his players from second the game that kicked off to the last minute. He was just all game long on them. And I'm standing there as a perspective of like, if I was this 16-year-old, I would not want to play for this coach next season if he's like this every game, but every session as well. It would be too much for me to cope with.
Yeah, I think, as you say, I think you've got to really consider what kind of information you're giving them. And yeah, I think 1 or 2 key messages throughout a session, I think, is a good thing. Again, going back to my old coaching practice, I'm very conscious that I'll sometimes be like, okay, you need to, turn your feet to the side, you need to make your racket low, you need to make sure you're finishing, up high, like lows are high. You need to make sure you're going into ready position, all these kind of things. And then you're just thinking, oh, I fed so much information to this child. They're not going to be able to, what do they do first? You know what I mean? What's the first fix? So, yeah, I think, as you say, keeping it to a minimum is a good thing in the long run. I think, yeah, as you say, when you're coaching in the moment, that might look good because it might look like you've got all this information and you know exactly what you're talking about. But in the long term, the learning's not going to be as strong.
Absolutely, and it's all about those learning, because if these players were to go away and then they had to equip their learning or equip the environment which they're in and then go away from there, they're not realistically going to have the ability to problem solve or be there independently to have those opportunities to approach their game, because they've just been, hounded with information for, however long this coach has had them for, and then they're not ready and prepared to then step out independently in another context or environment, and they might struggle with that because they're just used to being coach led rather than that balance and having that then player approach and that independent opportunity.
Yeah, definitely, I agree. I think going back to what I was talking about at the beginning with the buy-in, I think that's where it's really valuable, having players like leading the knowledge that they want to gain and that kind of thing, because that's where over time we're going to sustain participation. You're going to, improve learning. You're going to improve knowledge because it's coming from the player themselves. So yeah, I think that's really valuable.
Absolutely, and that's part of my own coaching philosophy there. And I had a group from age of 6 to about under 12s, and I stepped away from them this year, and it was such a tough choice to make after being with them for 6 years. But I wanted to go and work with a seniors group, so I'm now working with 19s, and I get to work with the seniors and approach more of a competitive game and how that comes through. And the psychology from being with my group to now the psychology of 16 to 19-year-olds is completely different, and it's opened up a whole new world. But when it comes down to that, because I had them for 6 years, they were so used to the way I coached them, and we had such a good repetition of the way we done things. And it was that point where it was great that I was with them for so long, but I also knew that as much as it was a difficult choice to walk away, I had to walk away for the best of them as well. They had to have a new approach, they had to have someone else coming in, they had to have new ideas, because to sustain that over a long period of time, if it was continuing for the next 5 or 6 years, I could have given them so much more, but then they would have been so used to the way that we done things. And I think having that change is so important. And it was great because I sort of left them, and as I say, that philosophy is giving them so much information and knowledge, whereby when I left, they're able to continue and perform things. So if they were to go on and be scouted by an academy, or they decided to go and leave for another team, then they're already prepared with that information to understand the game better than some of our other players. And we certainly saw that when we started the new group below us, when we moved to a new club. And a lot of players lack that knowledge, and I'm seeing it now with the 16-year-olds that I'm having, whereby they've had the same coach for 10 years. They're lacking so much knowledge when I talk to them about things where I would have done with my under 11s, under 12s, because I gave my group naturally that information because I got into it. But now I'm sort of having to go into this new 19s group and sort of undo and unpick all the information that they don't have, and then feed it back into them and go, right, this needs to be done, this is how we could do it. And it's difficult because a lot of them then are not ready to step up and be on the seniors pathway, because it's a huge step up from playing junior and youth football.
Yeah, of course. And I think, as you say, like growing adaptability is really positive there, because like the environment they're going into, it's going to be ever changing. Like if they do step up to the seniors team, then managers coming in and out all the time, so they've got to be able to kind of just grow with the coach that they've got, and make different decisions and that kind of thing, and adapt to different situations. So yeah, I think it's positive moving around, and not just for them, as well for you, because you're, like, as you say, you moved from a younger age group to an older age group. You've had to change how you coach. You had to learn to adapt to the situation. So yeah, I think it's positive both ways.
And I love that you say that when in terms of groups, and I, essentially, as much as my philosophy and my style can stay the same, how I'm working with my 19-year-olds compared to, say, my 11-year-olds might be very, very different, because they're understanding and interpreting information very differently. They're able to get a different perspective. They have that different knowledge factor. They're going to respond. And I was speaking to another coach, and he was saying that he coaches a young group, and he started with seniors, but he sort of tracked back and now coaches youngers. But he says that he doesn't change how he coaches the youngers to his seniors. I was like, and he was like, that's a good thing. And I was like, well, I don't necessarily think that all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's difficult because they're in a different situation. Like, you've got young kids who are obviously they're there, but they're the chances of them actually making it as a professional footballer are like ridiculously reduced to under 19s, potentially going to seniors. So I think that's also a really important consideration. Like under 11s, under 12s, like you've got to grow the enjoyment, and yeah, with the chances of them making it for success, it's really important that I think that comes as a priority. You know, you're building them, yeah, you're building them for like being in tough situations and being able to respond, but that's going to be stuff that's applied to, you know, everyday life. Like they're going to go through GCSEs, they're going to go through A levels, they're going to be tough times. How they manage that, I think that's really important. But then the consideration around, okay, this is like under 19s high competition, you know, there's going to be deselection. We need to consider those things compared to under 11s, under 12s, where, okay, let's enjoy the competition. You know, I think that's the big difference. But yeah, in terms of like the resilience stuff and going out on pitch and dealing with losses and dealing with hard adverse times, that kind of thing. I think that can be translated into, you know, every part of life. You're going to go into a business job, and you know you're going to be a competition against like work colleagues or a position or something like that. You know, I think that sort of stuff can be translated, but yeah, I think distinction is important in some ways.
Absolutely, I completely agree. And understanding each of our players is very important, or individuals that we work with, and to try and get through to make sure that information is relayed and how we work with them in a way that they're going to respond. And one thing that I worked very closely with that group between under sixes to under 12s was I had a salesman join the coaching team. And obviously, when you're a grassroots volunteer, you get who comes forward, and I was very lucky in that sense because although he was a salesman, he was very good at coming forward, very good at putting ideas. He was looking at perspective, personality, and he was able to apply everything done in sales in terms of what we were doing on the pitch. So it was great, and I learned so much away from him. And the one thing that we worked with players was I set up mentoring groups, and we've done that on personality testing around our 3 coaches. And we filter the players towards the personality of the coach, whereby we could get through to them. So there was no point putting little Joey with Coach little Joey with Coach Coach Luca if we didn't have that connection. So could I put little Joey with Coach Stephen, for example? So could Stephen get through to him? Could he relate to him? And then could we build that comparative opportunity back into it, where we could build those bridges if they weren't originally existing. And then we started looking at personality testing, and then we looked at colours, how we could group players by colours to understand them in terms of how we come through. And that was really interesting, and it was something that we've never looked at before, but it was a great way for players to understand themselves, and then how that might change over a period of time. So who our leaders were, who our followers, who were the game changers, who were those who were happy to stay. So then you end up finding little groups within your wider group. And then you find the individual personality. So I think that's so important, because when it is difficult if you've got massive groups of say 30, but then when you've got a team that you're so close and tight with, to understand a personality and coach them all differently is very important. And it's to try and get those buy-ins, and it's to look at those behaviours, it's to look at those praise. And when we look at say Professor Damien Hughes, for example, and he talks about liquid thinking and psychology. What he says is by the age of 4, essentially the benefits kids compared to professional kids, the benefits kids will hear twice as many negatives compared to positives by the age of 4 compared to professional kids. And that's so interesting in terms of how that relates to psychology and understanding players then, because we're having so many players from different backgrounds and different home lives, environments, circumstances, that we have to then give them that praise. We have to sometimes overpraise those players, and sometimes one player might go, well, why is he getting more praise than the other? And sometimes they don't always understand that approach that we're having, but I think it's important that we're getting through to each and every player. And we had a player come from a very tough background. Dad was used to shouting at him a lot. And then we sort of had to unpick and then go, right, we're not going to shout at you, but we're going to change and try and get through to your behaviour. And there was a lot of work done with that, but it all came down to that buy-in, whereas he could have gone, you know what, we banned Dad, and if Dad didn't like it, then usually he would just move club. But we banned Dad, and it worked for us, and Dad had that buy-in because he understood that we were trying to change his psychology, the environment, and the way that he approached with his child. And the child stayed with us and actually said, you know what, I'm not going anywhere, and Mum backed the child. And then we've done a lot of work with the family, so it did extend, but it was that importance of understanding our individuals.
I think that's really, really good. As you said, I think understanding the individual is really important, but I think also an important consideration with that is how do they change over time.
Yeah.
So how you're saying about those colours, like they're very changeable in terms of your situation, in terms of your environment. So I think having the knowledge for, like, with the team that, okay, well, Johnny's green at the moment, but in 2 years' time he might be yellow. Like, things can change so quickly depending on how they're growing up, who they're growing up with, who they're being influenced by. So I think that's also really important to know that your teammate might change and you might have to adapt how you're interacting with that person. And again, like, down to the individual, I think, the colours are really good to kind of get a basic understanding, but like the best way to get the knowledge that you need for that specific player is just to ask them, like, how do you like to be communicated to? Like, what kind of things do you like? When I'm coaching you, what wouldn't you want to? What don't you want to see as much of? Like, that kind of thing. I think that's really valuable and sometimes just like underestimated, because I think it's even asking a player that can be really like influencing for them. But okay, they want to know what I like. They're really interested in me. They want to buy into me. They want to make sure that I'm like the best person I can be as well as a player. I think that's also really important. So yeah, I think understanding the individual in terms of really like homing into what it is they want. I think that's really good.
And again, that want is really important. So it applies especially now at 19. So what do they want out of it? Do they want to try and get a semi-pro? Do they want to go abroad? Do they want to try and find a scholarship? Is it just a case of then going to university, finding a job, and playing it as a bit of a recreation? Is it is seniors actually for them? Do they want to stay at under 19s and not play seniors, and turn that down? And how does that look? And there's a lot around it in terms of what the 19s are doing, and it's quite interesting to see the different dynamics of those who want to push and get into seniors, those who are not interested, those who already can see dropping off because they're not ready to step up, play against men, and be in that environment, to be up against the bigger physical challenges, and how much more they're pushed in training, etc. And it's a big jump between playing youth football to senior football, but it's important that we understand that dynamic, and coaching those players is important to understand them, because I've done a lot of the Myers-Briggs personality tests, and a lot of time I'm very much introverted because I love to work on my own. I love to get things done, and then I was speaking to a uni friend the other day, and when I was having that conversation with her, I say, well, what you see in uni is very different to how I am away from uni. I said, you will see the most introverted extrovert in uni, and then it will just flip from the other side. So it's different the way that personality can change in terms of that environment and those groups that we're around, because I might go into a new group of people, and it'll take me time to read the room, get to know them, sit off, and then watch, and then sort of be pulled in by someone else. Whereas if I was with a very good group of friends, I'd be very loud, very brash, happy to go in and get mucked in. And it can be different for those players, because especially when we have new players as well, when they're stood, especially say like 9-10 years of age, coming into a new group, and they see this group who are, you might have the players who are very good technically, very sharp passing the ball. You've got the players who are shooting, then you've got all these players doing something, but you have to then step onto that pitch, new coach, not knowing anyone. It's quite a difficult place to sort of step into.
Yeah, I think as well, like, going back to what you were saying about these personality tests, I think you need to also consider, like, as you say, what environment you're actually using them in. Like, are you using them at the start of the season where you might have a couple of players who are new, they don't understand the environment, they're not like familiar. Whereas, are you doing it later in the season, or are you doing it just before a big game? Like, all these factors are really important in terms of what kind of outcome you're going to get from those things. So yeah, I think that's just having that in your mind is important. Like, okay, when are we doing this? How are we going to use the information from it? Because it is really changeable.
Absolutely, it's about how then you use that information to get through, and it's quite interesting in terms of the way that it's being done to get through. And I was watching the Chelsea documentary on the Zone for the women's team, and there's a player, Jess Carter, on there, and she's only 21 years of age, and she was working with the new head of performance analysis, Bart, who came in, and he was saying that he wanted her to lead the warm-up, wanted her to be at the front, and she was saying, I can't understand the difference in you wanting me to be at the front compared to me being at the back. And that was quite interesting, the way that she sort of asked that question, and the way that he was requesting that from her in terms of that he wanted her to be at the front leading, and he wanted that leadership skill, and he wanted to increase that professionalism, he wanted to drive that performance. And the way that she sort of came back to it and said, what is the difference? It was quite an interesting sort of question, because it was quite clearly showed that she wasn't ready to understand, or wasn't in that position to understand it, or she was reluctant to, or she didn't want to lead from the front, or she doesn't see the difference in that performance-driven capacity to try and get it to elevate. So that was quite an interesting, just one question, whereas I could spend a lot of time reflecting on it and asking hundreds of questions just from one.
Yeah, and I think again, like, it's important to consider as well. Like, does she, there is value from leaning from the back, like making sure that all of your players are getting through, making sure that they're feeling supported, because there's always someone like behind them, basically. So yeah, it's also important to consider, okay, does she see more value in that than leading from the front, or does she assign that role to somebody else? I think that's where again the like a role clarity comes in your team. Like, what's your role? Who is leading these decisions, and where are they coming from? Because I think, going back again to the player buy-in, I think they've got to come from players, because that's going to be their job. Like, they're interacting with each other, they need to know what each other are doing, and like what their purpose is on the pitch, and what are their roles. I think that's really important as well, because that's how you gain that clarity, is having those discussions.
And I think it's that importance then of questioning and questioning techniques and how that works then, because asking those key questions can be really vital in terms of, for a coach, for a player, and then that player to ask them back and have that environment to ask it. And when you are coaching yourself, do you have a 10 list of questions that you might naturally ask during a session?
Not really, to be honest. I think, again, it's important to adapt to the environment you've got. So I like to use a lot of questions around kind of the practice setup and like why we're doing it. So like, I'll often hit a ball out on purpose, or hit it really hard, and be like, okay, well, was this a good shot? Was this a bad shot? Why do you think that is? Like, what is the purpose of us doing this? And like, even to the extent of like during a warm up, where you're like placing the players. So say we've got like like the game cat and mouse.
Yeah.
Like, using the distances between, okay, well, where are you running to, and then how close are you to your like opponent? Like, why is that? Why have we done that? How can we make it harder? So I think these are like the questions that I often use. I don't think I'd say they're set questions. I quite like to try of adapt to what's in front of me, and what feels most appropriate.
I love that. There's two good questions there, and why have we done that, and why are we doing this? Because I think that's really important. And it's just as you were saying there, I'm just reflecting in the game last weekend. It literally came down to the last 8 minutes of the game. We were trailing 3-2. We were 3-0 down at half time, but we come back 3-2. We were in a position to try and get another goal, and we were almost in there to get it. We ended up losing 3-2. But we had a right back. He was a little bit slower, a little bit sluggish. I was like, right, can I afford to keep him on for the next 8 minutes? And how's this going to look? Are we going to go down 4-2? Could I get the game back to 3-3? So I pulled him off. I put our current striker on at right back, because he was full of energy, good runner, very fit. And he ended up pocketing the left wing for the last 8 minutes of right back. And then I put on a player up front who just pressed. But as this player came off, I saw him signal to his mum, sort of asking, why am I coming off? And he was very frustrated with that. So it quite clearly showed that he was angry that he came off, because he felt he was doing a good job. But he also didn't understand why we were doing it. So obviously we were pressing from the front. We thought that we'd get back in the game. We thought a third goal was coming. And we thought that we could, make a difference in the defence, because it was lucky that he stayed on after following half-time, because he wasn't doing very well up until that point. It was only that we had one sub on the bench and we were limited choices, that I was ready to make that change half-time, but we stopped and postponed that and left it to only 8 minutes left. But it's that important, and as I say, for a 16-year-old to struggle with that understanding, because he's never had that before, in terms of why is the coach doing this, or this has been done for this reason. And sometimes we get some of the older boys who have played 19s football for a bit longer and been in the academy, where they are scholars and have a very good understanding of professionalism, understanding the game, and when a decision is made, that is it, and it's been made for the best of the team. That when they come in and work with these 16-year-olds who've never been in that environment and never had that sort of coaching, that these younger players are very much struggling with it, because they've never been in that context, for example.
Yeah, and I think it's also important that like even if it's you're not being subbed off because of poor performance, like there are other reasons around that, as you say, like for the best of the team. Okay, so your skill set might not be the strongest. Like you might have somebody else on the bench who provides a different angle to what you're looking for in the game, and I think that's also really important having those conversations with the player that's come off and be like, we think you performed really well. If they did, we think you performed really well. We just chose player A because he's got this skill set which we needed in that specific moment of the game. That doesn't mean that come next week the situation is different. We might need you to come on because you've got a certain skill that player A hasn't got. And I think that's also really important, like understanding that they're not always being subbed off because of poor performance, because I think that's quite quick to jump to. Like there's certain situations where, as you say, for the best of the team, you need a different skill set to be brought on. And I think that's important to recognise. It's not always linked to a negative reason.
And when we say they go away and think about it and are asking those questions, it can essentially lead to overthinking. So why have I been brought off? As a coach brought me off because of this, because of that, and they're asking so many questions because it's not answered. So therefore, that overthinking stimulant kicks in. So when a player is overthinking, what ways do you support a player to reduce their overthinking and to try and alleviate them from delving into deeper thoughts?
I think I know it's difficult. I think in certain situations you do have to give them a bit of time because especially when it's like that raw emotion of okay, you just come off pitch. Like I think you need to let them kind of get it out a little bit. I think that's okay. I think then it's just a case of like just one-to-one conversations around the reasoning behind it. I think if they have the clarity of why the decision's been made, I think that helps them. And then it's the question of, okay, well, coach, like what can I do next time to not come off the pitch? I don't want to be coming off the pitch. How do I get better? And then that's where the kind of productive conversation comes in, and you can work and think forward rather than the overthinking of thinking backwards. So yeah, I think probably for me it'd be those stages, like letting them just bring it back down, let them get it out if they need to, just for a little bit, and then having that having that near one-to-one conversation with them away from the group, just to speak it through, and then next steps.
I think that's good there in terms of what you say there, and there's a lot that can come into it then in terms of their visualization. Then when they're going to approach the game next week, to stop overthinking it. But then sometimes if we use visualization, sometimes you can overthink it too much because they don't have that balance or the kind of terminology that we're using and how we're approaching it, where we're sitting with them, when we're having that conversation. Are they, fully stimulated from a day because they've been in school all day, or are they tired? Are they ready to prepare and talk about it? Are we doing it over Teams? Are we doing it in person? Are we doing it at the club? Are we doing it on? There's so much that comes into it, which is really important. And I just absolutely love the mind of people and the way that we approach things. And even little things for me in terms of upping the standards in when you set up a session, so everything is organised, ready. So your cone's on the side. If you need to pick one up, you can drop one in. The balls are there, ready to play back in, and everything is sort of set out where it needs to be. Whereas I see other coaches setting up sessions, and they might have all the time in the world, but then the players are sort of coming in, the session's not set up, or they're moving things as the session's going on, or there's a lot of stop-start, or the ball rolling time is reduced, or there's a lot of disorganisation or transitions in between. And I think just being as organised as possible ups the standards in terms of when players are coming in, and that's the same for me in the classroom. So I see very disorganised classrooms, but if my classroom's organised, work's on the desk, books are ready, chairs are tucked in, we get them to walk in, it makes a big difference in terms of how they're prepared, how they're ready to certainly come into a session, come into the classroom, be ready to learn. And for me, every session is about being ready to learn so they can take as much away as possible. Because if they don't have that ability, as you say, to go on and be that professional footballer, then do they have the knowledge capacity to stay in the game, to do psychology, to go in and be an analyst, to go in and do coaching themselves, to maybe be a commentator, to work in media, but to try and stay in the game in some capacity, but just to do something else around it because they've been around it for so long? It'd be such a shame to see them walk away from it altogether.
Yeah, and I think, as you said about that organisation, I think that's really important, like just setting the standards for them so that they understand that this is like what good practice looks like. I think being proactive and kind of like anticipating situations that might come up, or using the people around you, like if you've got support staff on pitch, like use them, ask them to do stuff. Like I know when I was on placement, like we'd stand around the side of the pitch like psychologists and performance analysis and S&C. Like we'd be around the sessions, and if the ball went off the pitch, we'd go and get it and bring it back in. So the guys had more ball rolling time and had more time actually doing the stuff that they wanted to do, rather than running around like chasing after things, which isn't overly helpful. But then again, I think when the situations that you haven't got the support stuff, like use the players or use the people you're working with, because if they're doing stuff, then they're getting through the boring stuff more quickly. So again, like just really, really simple stuff. Like when I'm coaching tennis, I'll get the kids to do like certain tasks for me, and I'll be like, oh, like Jimmy, can you go and how many cones can you collect in the next 10 seconds? Like how quickly can you get them up? That kind of thing. And that just kind of means that there's more time to actually do the stuff that they want to be doing, but they haven't really picked up on it. Like they're like, oh wow, okay, the court's clear already. How did that happen? And I think that's another skill where you don't have the staff around you to do it. So yeah, you just got to use the players and use it in a fun, quick way, and then all of a sudden they're ready to move on to the next thing. So yeah,
I absolutely love that, and I know there's so much that I've done when I was doing TOTS coaching, and it'd be every Saturday morning I'd be set ready 8:45 for them to come in at 9, and then we'd have 2 45-minute sessions, so 9 to 9:45, 15 minutes in over 10 to 10:45, and then have that tidy up. But it was literally operational element, because we were setting, the kids would come in, we do the session, boom, 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 straight into the next session, boom, 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 and then because I'd done that, how many cones can we get in? It was literally already on the side, and by 11 o'clock I was out. Whereas most coaches are out then by 11:30 because they're tidying up, they're slowly collecting things, and that's just a little thing that I've still ended up taking away is, can the players go and pick things up? Can they do it? Because at the end of the day, we've also got other sessions to get to, or, we've been in work all day long and we'd like to get home after a session. We don't want to be spending time picking up all these cones afterwards, because we've already been there maybe half hour before setting up a session. So I think just utilising players in that is such a little key skill that we can just have in our arsenal in terms of having to pick it up. But working with younger players, you can turn that into fun little concepts, and then, it ends up becoming a fun little activity for them, because then they have little competitions. I picked up more cones than you, But it's great that you can utilise that within your coaching capacity. And I think in the back of my mind for, volunteers, grassroots coaches who are starting out, that's something to try and really get into it and get into your coaching practice and the way you pack up your sessions. And but it's also that responsibility that you're teaching all the players that, you're not just going to shoot off now and leave me with all this. It's your responsibility to pick this up as well as mine. It's, you've used it for the session, you've been out there, pack it away as well as me. And that's something that I've instilled into my 19s group this year, and they're not used to tidying up, but it's that little thing, and changing that that recognition and that pattern in terms of, this is how every session needs to be done. At the end, this is your responsibility, you're in it together. And a little thing, pattern is I was reading earlier in the week, and someone was saying that patterns aren't important, that they're actually detrimental, that there's no point using patterns such as continuously pushing passing exercises there. And it was an interesting thought, because I'm looking at the way we're playing last week's game and from an analyst point of view, and I'm like, right, where were our patterns? Why weren't we setting up? Why weren't we getting the ball out of the back? And I was like, right, if we're getting patterns in our training exercise and contact time, then realistically it's going to benefit us in the game, because we're recognising the way things should be. But then that question sort of stopped with me in the week and went, well, wouldn't that be detrimental? Because then are we taking away player creativity? Are we taking away problem solving? Are we taking away their critical thinking? And it's that interesting balance. Is patterns beneficial? Are they not beneficial? What's your thoughts around that?
I think where possible, like I think it should be built in around kind of a match practice setting. Like I know it's not always possible if you haven't got the player numbers and that kind of thing, but I think creating it, and I know it's never going to be exactly the same as a real match, but I think where possible, creating an environment that looks like a game, so that you're bringing up situations where they need to recognise patterns, or they need to see, like, view the game whilst they're in it, in the moment. Okay, what's the best thing? Are we in this, like if you're talking about a certain pattern throughout the week, okay, well, can we recognise when we're falling out of the pattern or when we need to be in it? Like how can we adjust to the situation? I think that's important, because it's all well and good doing, drill after drill after drill on a certain pattern, but then they come to the game and all of a sudden they're not in the drill, it's completely different. So I think where possible, I think that's really important to replicate as many aspects as possible, even if it's at a slightly lower level. I think that's still really important.
I'm glad that you said that, and I completely agree with you. And I think it's good to recognise those patterns, because then if you're in that game, it's recognising the patterns of the opposition team. So how can I prepare? Oh, they're continuously doing this. So I've recognised that really quickly. Let's eliminate that, because we can change our formation, or we can just change the way that we can move our left back to the right back, because he's quicker to deal with that. And the pattern is that they're getting the ball through outside every time. So that's when that tactical change comes into play. And if players recognise that, then they can understand why we're doing those movements. And I think they're really important to try and get involved and have there. And I'm absolutely behind that 100%. And I just to touch on that before I throw some quick fire questions at you and let you go. I remember speaking to one coach once, and he was saying patterns do not exist. No two patterns are the same, because that pass is never going to be the same as one before. I was like, okay, good argument. It's not the same, but patterns do exist, because if the players do a triangle passing exercise, and then they repeat that four or five, 6 times in a session, regardless how different the passing type has been, they've still done that pattern. The pattern has been that triangle. And I just remember thinking on it and taking that away and literally thinking, what has this coach said to me? Is he trying to modernise the game and going patterns do not exist and break all kind of philosophy of life? But that was just an interesting concept in terms of patterns that we had around that conversation.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think in some ways, I feel like you're both right, because as you say, you can have a triangle, but the triangle might not look exactly the same every single time that you go on a step out pitch. So you can have it in your mind that you want to work a triangle, but yeah, the triangle is going to look different in every game situation. So yeah, to some extent, yeah, you can see both sides of the coin.
Okay, so our quick fire questions before you go off and continue your great day.
Yep.
If you had to have someone describe you in three words, what would they be?
Accountable, punctual. One more. Respectful.
Love it. If you could move to any country to coach, where would it be?
I've always wanted to coach in Spain, so tennis in Spain. Yeah.
Tennis as well. Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
If you could spend a day with any coach or manager, who would it be?
That's a great question. Probably Jose Mourinho. I absolutely just love to just sit and be a fly on the wall.
I absolutely love that. He was literally in the back of my mind as I was coming up to this call with you. Who was or is your role model?
I think growing up playing tennis, probably Serena Williams. I absolutely loved Serena Williams. I loved how fierce she was on court, and how assertive she was. So probably still some respects, still her.
Fab. If you were to be a full-time professional sports person or a full-time professional coach, psychologist, manager, whatever you wanted to be, which would you be?
Probably sports psychologist, yeah.
Love it. What is your number one top tip for any coach?
I think, going back to what we were saying about the game realism, in practice, how can we practice as closely as possible to how we play?
Fab. And the last one, what is one thing you enjoy most about coaching?
Just the enjoyment of seeing a little kid come onto court and just their faces lighting up when they hit a tennis ball, and they absolutely love it. I think as a takeaway, I think the biggest thing for me is, okay, have the kids come on court and have they enjoyed the session. I think that's such an underestimated part of coaching. If that kid's coming in and they're happy, they're going to stay there. I think that's really, really important.
Fab, and there we are. Well, I'm so grateful that you could come on. I love conversations like this because I'm thinking so much as I'm asking questions as well, and it's more than a Q&A essentially, because I just see it as more of a thinking exercise an hour really. But I really do appreciate your time, especially how busy you are as a master's student around coaching, around life as well. But it's been great that we can finally make this happen, and I wish you the best luck in terms of your studies over the next few months, and you get the desired result, which I'm sure you will be. But I hope we can touch base over the next few weeks. But honestly, I'm so grateful for your time this morning.
Cool. Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. Thank you, Luca. It's been great.
I'm really glad. Well, thank you very much and have a great day.
Thank you, too. See you later.
Bye.
Bye.